Our first myth is COVID-19 helped gender equality. Well, I personally I think that the pandemic really helped everyone to kind of come together and make decisions together. So I'm curious to see how you're going to kind of argument on this one.
Okay, so the myth is how COVID-19 helped gender equality.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and say, I think a lot of people think this, and I'm going to walk you through several points to kind of explain why it actually didn't help us in terms of gender equality. So gender equality is obviously like a very broad topic, so I'm going to start by narrowing it down. One way of thinking about gender equality is thinking about the division of paid and unpaid work. This basically means who is earning money and who is doing unpaid work like cooking, cleaning, taking care of kids. This is an important test of it's an important litmus test of gender equality because it's about economic empowerment. So, like you mentioned, the World Economic Forum estimates that globally we are still 2 centuries away from gender economic equality.
Yes.
Now, some people think that COVID-19 is catalyzing gender equality because when you think of a family, and especially like a heterosexual family with kids, so like a husband, wife, and like some kids, then what you have is you have a husband and wife who are both working at home and also taking care of kids. So some people think that in this context, it's sort of going to be like all hands on deck as men and women sort of trade off things like childcare, etc., since both are at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
And both have to do paid work, right? Mm-hmm. And in a limited sense, we are seeing this happen. There are some studies from the US, for instance, that show that men have been doing more right now than they do in the past. But a few important points. Men are not doing more than women. And what's happening to women's paid work is actually very troubling. And I'm just going to walk you through a few points here. So for instance, data from Australia, which is just emerging, shows that the lockdown, when it happened there, added 6 additional hours of unpaid work daily.
Wow.
Out of this, women do 4 hours and men do 2.
That is actually convincing our audience a bit more because I can definitely see some fire emojis going up. Could you walk me through the next point? What else?
So another survey from the US shows, another thing that's happened is because childcare centers and schools have been shut in many countries during the lockdown. So a survey from the US shows that 70% of women reported being the primarily responsible for children's homeschooling during this time. So they're participating in paid work, but also making sure their kid is, doing whatever stuff for school on Zoom and so on. Another survey from the UK showed that mothers have reduced their hours spent in paid work much more than fathers, and some have also talked about how they might have to opt out of paid work altogether because they need someone to take care of children at home while kids are at home.
I really feel that our audience is really catching up with you, and they're pretty much as convinced as I am because I'm seeing the fire emojis all over the screen, and I think we're very, very close to burning the myth. Is there something else you'd like to add to burn the myth, or should we just light it up?
I have more data points that I can give if you want to hear them. So
yeah, if you could keep it really short.
Sure. So basically, for academics like myself, our career progression depends on publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And what the data from journals is showing is that men are submitting much more articles than women, even when compared to last year at the same time. So again, we're going to see this a few years down the line when we'll see that men will be more likely to be university professors than women. That's another data.
Yeah, absolutely. With that final remark, I think we could definitely set this myth to flames. Okay, so you got that one. Let's see if we could get this one too. So the next myth is home office will replace the office.
Okay, what I have to say about this is I really hope it doesn't happen, because if it does, it's going to be very bad for gender equality as well. And I'm going to walk you through that, kind of walk you through like what the gender inequality aspects of working from home are. So firstly, one thing is that in workplaces, there's this norm of being an ideal worker. An ideal worker is someone who can be very sort of dedicated to work into the evenings, work on weekends, travel for work. Basically, their life revolves around working.
That's me.
Now, men are actually usually more able to do that because, especially men with kids, because when you think again about the unpaid work, like cooking, cleaning, taking care of kids, who's doing that? If you're at work all the time, either you're paying someone to do that or you're doing that yourself. So men are much more able to do that because they often, have wives at home who are sort of, taking care of all that responsibility of the unpaid work. Now, what happens is that employers often think of men as like sort of good workers, ideal workers, and women as sort of not ideal workers. And in terms of working from home, what we are seeing from stuff coming out in the pandemic is that when a woman is sort of on a Zoom call, and let's say her toddler kind of comes by and disrupts her, it's often seen as like, oh, it's unprofessional. Look, she's not able to manage her work and her home properly. Whereas if the same thing happens with a dad, it's sort of like, oh, look, what a great dad he is. He's working and he's taking care of his kids. So there's these two-sided ways of interpreting the same thing.
And I think our audience is also, again, you're so good at convincing people. I mean, the fire emojis are all over the screen, and I don't know how you do it, Aliya, really. I think we managed to burn this one too.
Okay.
Burn! God, I love this show. The last myth, which I am a bit in doubt whether or not you could be able to debunk, is millennials want gender equality. And here, I really think that there has been a lot of progress done and that we are really, really there. Like, I don't see why this is not true.
Yeah, I think the reason you might think that is we often think of sort of gender equality or equality in general as happening in a linear way, that because, you know, like whatever has happened now is more equal than what came before. And what we're actually seeing with the millennials in many countries is that's not the case. So I'll give you one example. One example is that of like when you look at millennials and you ask them like attitudinal questions about what do you think men and women's roles in society are? What do you think men and women's roles in their families are? What you see is that there's a lot of support for women's labor force participation, so that people do think that yes, women should, you know, be employed, they should work and all of that. You see that much more in millennials than in the generations before them. But what else, when you ask them, like, well, who do you think should take care of the home? How do you think people should divide up housework and things like that? Which is, like I said earlier, a very important test of gender equality. What you see is that millennials, and especially millennial men, sort of say, actually, I want to be the breadwinner, and I want my wife, she should be able to stay at home. Now, this is a regression from previous generations. They didn't have such a stark take on this. They were in some ways more equal in this. So this kind of attitudinal survey data from millennials, and this is the data that I'm mentioning right now is from the US, is very troubling. And what you see is like, well, millennial men say that, you know, yeah, okay, equality is good. We might want an equal partner, an equal wife. But if that can't happen, then I should be the breadwinner. And what the women are saying is that I want equality with my partner. And if that doesn't happen, then I don't want to get married.
What do you think when it comes to education? How have we progressed much?
So in many countries, women outperform men in education from schooling onwards, right? Like they're getting higher grades, they're often completing a bachelor's degree and so on at a higher level. But when you look at where men and women are concentrated, like what their majors are, men are the ones going into majors that are going to make a lot of money, and women are not. So we don't have economic equality there either, even though educationally women are sort of outperforming men.
I think it's also because employers kind of tend to take into consideration things like maternity leave and, you know, so that kind of hinders also.
But can I say something else to that? Like
yes.
when you have like a father, when he says to his employer, oh, listen, I'm going to become a dad, he actually gets what's called a fatherhood bonus because the employer is like, oh, he needs more money to support his family. When a woman kind of says the same thing, oh, I'm, you know, going to have a kid, the employer is sort of like, okay, let's kind of take money away from her. Like there's a motherhood penalty essentially to simplify matters, which is sort of like, well, she's a mother, she's going to be distracted, she won't kind of move up the organizational hierarchy in this way. So even becoming a parent is seen by employers very differently for men and women.
I also think in the workplace, I think there has been some posts going on Instagram on some really popular account. Even sometimes in the actual workplace, the way we say things. So if I say, I don't know, I'm busy, can we please talk about this later? And then my colleague who's a male would say the same thing. I would come off as, you know, bitch, but my colleague is somebody who is a hard worker and who is good at time management, whereas me, I'm too assertive and too much, and why am I like not smiling more, you know?
Absolutely, that's called like a likability bias, whereas women are sort of seen as too kind of competitive or not being likable enough, that's actually like a check mark against them for promotions. But men can sort of be quote unquote aggressive, and that's but he's so kind of committed to work. He's a leader, whereas she's such a, like you said, a bitch.
But so how do you think we can help women become kind of help them to become, not become leaders, but kind of help them rise into leadership positions? What are the things that we can do in order to make sure we see more women in more politicians, as decision makers? What are the a few suggestions that you might have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I would say here is these are problems of structure and of culture. These are big problems, right? Like, how do you change everyone's mindset and whatever? And what I would say is that you don't do it through changing individual behavior. What that means that you don't tell women that behave like this and then you'll be a leader. What you try to do instead is, for instance, with work, with kind of progressing up workplaces, you try to normalize a workplace that takes into account that people have lives outside of work, that people have caring responsibilities. Some people have kids, some people have elderly parents, people have they have hobbies, and that we should encourage that. It shouldn't just be, that's one way of making sure that men, women, and other kinds of people can kind of progress equally in a workplace. So it's about changing workplace cultures. It's also this kind of, this idea of like being 24/7 at work. Research actually shows that countries where that happens, people are less productive on a per hour basis. So in terms of productivity, it makes no sense. It's just a kind of cultural hangover that helps men more and kind of harms women or anyone with caregiving responsibilities. It's actually, that we.
I would actually like to see this myth burn to flames, but I want to continue the conversation with you. So let us burn it first. Can I see the? It brings me pleasure every time. I don't know why. I think I might have been an arsonist in my past life, but you never know. So we talked a lot about leadership and skills that can be, I think, taught and changed within actually communities. I'm pretty sure you know about the Hofstede dimension, so how some cultures are feminist and some cultures are more, masculine. Do you think, do you have any information about Hungary? Because from what I've seen and experienced here in the last 3 years is that it's more of a macho culture. So how do you think Hungary can progress into more of a feminist community?
I think to be a feminist community, some things that you need that some countries do better than others is really to kind of have, like I said, I think recognizing caregiving, and that's one thing that's come out from the pandemic, that's one thing that I highlighted, as a sort of social good is necessary. So again, childcare centers, access to childcare, that kind of stuff, if a state can provide that, that's amazing. But otherwise, I think workplaces and employers kind of do more of that. Again, recognize people as sort of fully developed people with needs and lives outside of work. So I think that's one thing. I think a feminist kind of society, because paid work is such an integral part of all of our lives the world over, right? It provides economic sustenance, but it also provides emotional sustenance and things like that. So I think for that, what we need to do is that we do need to change the culture of paid work in many, many countries. Again, with this kind of idea of working so much that your life is work, and I'm so passionate about work, that's fine, you should be. I mean, I certainly am, but you should also have a life outside of work, and you should be encouraged. The whole point, when you look at this sociologist called Thorstein Veblen, what he talked about was that as societies progress and as technology progresses, we should actually be working less. Technology should be ending the amount of time, or should be kind of cutting back on the amount of time we spend in work so that we can have time for creativity, for leisure and stuff like that. And that's not what's happened.
And do you think we could actually, speaking of cutting down the work hours, do you think we would actually ever reach a 4-day work week, or is that beyond impossible?
I think that's a matter of a political will. I certainly hope it happens. I think that would be a good thing. I think that would also raise productivity per hour, which I think is a good thing. And yeah, so I hope it happens, but I think it's about politics. I don't think it's actually about necessarily that the society or globally will go backwards or anything. I don't think that's what's going to happen. It's just a political will story.
It would actually give me a lot more time to Netflix and chill, but let's not tell my boss about that. The non-existent boss, bosses around the world, if you hear me and you have a job for me, let me know. See, it's, yeah, even like in terms of employment, I think it's a bit of a struggle for females to find job. I think it's, the market is kind of used to hiring more men, like we mentioned, like because of, you know, the cultures in general. So another thing that I wanted to know, when it comes to, so childcare, we talked about that, giving like care in general. When it comes to like careers, do you think women like these days are gonna be opting for like a family life or careers more often? Like, do you see any trends? Do you see women choosing career after like over family, or are we doing the opposite?
It's hard to say, it's hard to make a blanket statement globally. What I can say is that the kind of choices that men and women make about their careers and about their families, like, you know, which one sort of matters more to them, is driven obviously a lot by culture, but it's also driven a lot by the kind of social policies that are in place in the countries. So for instance, if you have, like, I'll give you an example of Germany, for instance. Germany has very generous maternity leave policies. And you would think that that could, for instance, help women's labor force participation, that, you know, there's a lot of equality there, but that's actually not the case. Their policies are so generous as to kind of deter women almost from participating in the labor force. It's this very kind of, what the social policy there reinforces is this idea that the men should work and women kind of have more babies and things like that. And I think there's some data indicating that German women's fertility, for instance, is kind of relatively high right now, especially in comparison to other countries and things like that. So I think the social policies matter a lot.
I feel that, so for example, Hungary has been trying to, I mean, has actually kind of established some policies that encourage families to have more children. I think you get like free loans or something, or no, zero interest loans, or if you have more children. I think up to 4, you can actually have a house if you have more children. Whereas if we look at Tunisia, for example, where I'm from, we're actually trying to have less children. And women, I feel that, I mean, like my entourage, speaking personally, I feel that we are focusing more on education, career. Even getting married has become a bit like at a late age. I mean, my grandmother got married at 16, and I'm 23 and still single and a shame to the family, you know? So it's really interesting to see the difference between countries, you know? I wonder if there would ever be like a kind of a worldwide kind of agreement, or some kind of, I don't know, some kind of policy that would unite us all, and that, I mean, I didn't understand that cultures are different, people are different, but will there ever be any like close levels of when it comes to women at work and women with families, or will we ever reach a day where women actually don't have to choose and we can actually have both at the same time, and can, or none if we want, you know? So I really am looking forward to a day like that. And I don't know if you have any advice to any women out there when it comes to career versus family. Like, how do you make such a big decision?
I mean, the only advice I would say, so any kind of advice requires me to kind of talk about individuals, right? And I think like these are bigger problems that need to be tackled in a more systematic, structural way. But the one piece of advice I would give, especially to women, is like, if you are going to get married, then be very careful. Decide very carefully who you get married to, because one of the biggest indicators of how women do in their careers is the kind of support that they have from their husbands. So for women, that choice becomes extremely important.
Yeah, I see. Thank you so much for your time. I learned so much from you, and I'm pretty sure a lot of our viewers, especially female viewers, but also male viewers, have learned so much. And I'm looking forward to reading a lot of what you're writing, or your TV appearances, hopefully. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.